In terms of reviewing for today, a couple of things really quickly. If you are in my class, today we're going to be focusing on the stuff for your quiz that is either today or tomorrow. So that is everything that's Unit 1, Quiz 2 review session. Tomorrow's review session is going to go back to the very first half of the unit. So for those of you who have forgotten everything you learned at the beginning of the year, which I've had a couple of people ask me, what is the Columbian Exchange? If that is you, please come tomorrow, because those are concepts. There's a couple of seats up here, and you can also sit at my desk if you'd like as well, that you have to be able to study for, and that is tomorrow. If you are in my classes as well, you know that you have a test on either Thursday or Friday of this week over everything you've learned so far. If you are in Miss Pickett's class or my class, just know that those are the exact same tests. So what that means, the test has already been created. Everybody will do the exact same test. I will tell you that about, I would say 3/5 of it is going to be Revolutionary War and before. And then I would say it's going to be heavy on the Constitution, things about the Federalism, Anti-Federalists, things like that. And then it's going to be slightly about the very end, which is going to be after the Constitution, which is 1787 to the end. And I'll emphasize a little bit about what you would most likely see, okay? So if you guys have any questions, just let me know. We're going to start with what is on the board. And we're going to go in order from right after the Revolutionary War, okay? So we're going to start up here with Republican Motherhood, which is do you have a seat? Okay, go. So Republican Motherhood is going to be right after the American Revolutionary War. Basically, beforehand, we had the cult of domesticity, which, talking to Miss Pickett, I know that your class has not learned that term yet. You're going to learn it later, which is fine. Cult of domesticity basically just means that women were confined to the household. They had very traditional gender roles. What happens with Republican Motherhood is they're going to start to break away from that. So if you remember in the Revolutionary War, women are now starting to actually make an impact. Molly Pitcher is an example, who is going to actually fight in the Revolutionary War. Women are going to create the very first flag. Women are going to start to raise money to be able to help fund the Revolutionary War. Now what happens with Republican Motherhood is basically women should now get an education, but it's a limited education. Specifically, it's going to be an education that's going to focus on Latin in order to read the Bible, possibly a foreign language, more than likely French. You're going to learn how to be a homemaker, and you're going to learn the essentials of politics specifically so that you can teach your sons. The point of Republican Motherhood is for mothers to learn how to be able to assist their sons and husbands to become good politicians. That is the entire point. You're raising your sons to be in politics. Now, while this does give women some rights, it does expand education for them, especially the upper class. It, however, still confines you to the home, and you're really helping men out. So it's kind of a double standard. Anybody have any questions about Republican Motherhood? Okay. So, following immediately after that, let's go into the Articles of Confederation. So Articles of Confederation are going to be our very first government in America. It actually begins right before the Declaration is signed, but really becomes important immediately after the American Revolution. So what happens with the Articles of Confederation is they're going to be a very loose government. Fear of a big government, so instead states are going to have the emphasis and the power, and not as much in the federal government. In fact, it was so weak that the negatives really outweighed the positives. Now, there is one major positive that you should know in terms of a terminology for the AP exam. What is the one positive that you should know about the Articles of Confederation? What did it form or create? The Northwest Ordinance. So you need to know that. If you don't know that that's the positive, Northwest Ordinance, that is going to be the one really important one that you need to know. The Northwest Ordinance is going to be the first formal creation of a territory after the creation of the new government. So with the creation of this territory, it is going to be pretty much in Ohio and Iowa. These are going to be really those Ohio River Valley ones that we talked about before during the Revolutionary War. Now what's going to happen is those are going to be formed. They're going to have specific areas that you can purchase. So you can purchase this tract of land or this tract of land. Big things it did as well is it's going to be the first free public education system in America. And the really important one that they always talk about is it also banned slavery. It was the first banning of slavery in America from the government. A lot of people go to the Northwest Ordinance. One negative about it, it did take Native American lands. That's that whole Treaty of Greenville thing that's going to come up later on. But the thing that you need to know for the articles is going to be the negatives. Major, major negatives. This is really why they were so bad that we had to replace them. So the Articles of Confederation, the major negatives. Number one, no ability to tax. And that's a really important one. If you were in my class and you did the SAQ, a lot of you guys did it on lack of taxation. If you can't tax, you can't form a government. You don't have any money in order to be able to pay an army. You can't solve anything because you have no money to do it. That was one of the major problems with it. Number two, there was no standing army. So people felt unprotected from Native Americans. People felt like they were constantly under threat. Other examples of really bad things about the Articles of Confederation, they couldn't actually control what other people were doing. So, for example, you had some that would actually create alliance systems with others. For example, there were some states that actually said they were going to sell the rest of the United States to France. There were some states that said, me and Pennsylvania are going to work together and we are going to down New Jersey. It was a whole big mess because everybody was against each other. The big one is taxation, though. That's really the most important negative. And the fact that there really was no power over the people. They really didn't have any power to get people in trouble. They didn't have any power to punish. Everybody just did their own thing. Anybody have any questions on the articles? Okay. So once we the other one was Northwest Ordinance too. So with the articles as well, one great example of where these are going to be problems, there's two major ones that you need to know. And most of you did it really well in your SAQ because you talked about Shays Rebellion, which I also now found out is also being taught in AP Gov right now. So now you can all relate it. But with Shays Rebellion, what that's actually going to start with is the Newburgh Conspiracy. So Newburgh Conspiracy, which is highly unlikely to be on the AP exam as much, these are the pensions. So remember, you fought in the Revolutionary War under the impression you would later be paid. All these people want to get paid, but unfortunately for them, there's no money to tax. Therefore, you can't pay them back. So what happens is the Newburgh Conspiracy, where all of these veterans that were coming together, George Washington was able to say, don't fight, we'll figure it out. And then what happens with Shays Rebellion is going to be that they are going to attempt to tax these people. But because they tax these people, especially the farmers, are going to be angry and upset. And they're going to say, why is this fair to have us be taxed? You don't even have that power. So they're going to do a massive rebellion. Bunch of people die. Everything's in chaos. The president says stop, but the president doesn't have that power to tell them to stop. And so Shays Rebellion really shows how people are not trusting the government and what needs to change. Oh, and there's Shays Rebellion too. Shays Rebellion, again, really popular example of why the articles needed to go away and also why we needed a new government. Now, this brings us into the idea of federalism and anti-federalism. Really, this is the original Federalist, anti-Federalist. Really, really important concept. So the Federalists are going to support the passage of the Constitution. Will you shut the door? You crazy high schoolers. All loud running through the hall. Okay, so anyways, so with federalism, the idea is to have a strong central government. In fact, real true federalism is complete control over most of your lives. The federal government, as in the national government, has a bunch of control over your lives, supporting the passage of the Constitution. Anti-federalism means no Constitution. Just revise the articles. States' rights. Small town. Federalists are going to be in the north, the rich north. Anti-federalists are going to be in the poor south, agricultural south. States' rights versus national rights. Also, the term federalism itself, if you see it solo and it's not talking about political parties, federalism is the separation between the national government and the state government. So whose role is more important, individual states or the national government? Well, that was a rhetorical question for whoever responded. That's up to you, because that's a debate that even goes on right now. Traditional Republican states believe in more anti-federalism. Traditionally Democratic states believe in more federalism. Okay, now, following the creation of the government, one thing about the Constitution, the Electoral College, this is going to be the creation of basically how we elect our president. So what they're going to do is they're going to elect based on population. Every state has a set of electors that are elected by you guys and appointed. When you guys vote for the president, those electors say, okay, my district said that we should vote for Donald Trump, or my district said we should vote for Hillary Clinton. They then cast that vote 99% of the time based on your guys' opinions. However, they can always switch. They always have the right to do their own personal opinions. But the biggest thing you need to know with Electoral College is, one, it's an example of something that was in the Constitution, which is why when people say we should switch to the popular vote, it's really hard because you'd have to change the Constitution to do so. And then also it elects our president as well. And we'll talk about all the controversy with that too. The Supreme Court is also created in the U.S. Constitution. I'm not going to talk as much as John Marshall, although I'm super impressed that one of you knows John Marshall. You're probably not in my class.
Well, that's the definition on the equivalent Supreme Court week until John Marshall.
So you don't need to worry about John Marshall. You just need to know the word week. John Marshall is going to come up in the 1814, I believe it is, with a really famous court case called Marbury v. Madison. That confirms the power of the U.S. Supreme Court. So all you have to know before that is that it was weak. Really, it was bribery. If you wanted the Supreme Court to go your way, you give him a couple $1,000s and he'll go your way. The Supreme Court is justified later. So you don't necessarily need to know his name. You just need to know the Supreme Court was weak and it was created from the Constitution. Yeah. Okay, going from there, the Whiskey Rebellion, the biggest thing, this confirms the power of the president and it confirms the power of the federal government. This is when they are needing to raise money. Hamilton says let's raise it on whiskey as a sin tax because we don't need whiskey. In particular, though, whiskey is made from what crop? Does anybody remember? Corn. So they are going to specifically tax the corn farmers. Technically not, but that's who gets the most tax. So these guys are going to say, we're just going to do what Shays Rebellion did. So they're going to go and they're going to do an uprising, and they think it's going to be the exact same as before, where the federal government gives in, we get a new government. But this is where Washington says no. The power of the federal government is more important than your own needs. So instead of letting this uprising happen, he sends out 10,000 troops. Those 10,000 troops squash the rebellion. And the most important thing from that is it confirms that the American government has power. The president has power to control you as a person. As in, you can't just do whatever you want. If you want to go assassinate the president, you can't just do that. You actually have to go through a process. A lot of other countries, that's how they run. That's what Egypt did for years after their revolution a couple years ago. They just kept killing the president and creating a new government, thinking that's how it works. You have to really show that your government has power. Okay, heading into the two economic policies, Jeffersonian and Hamiltonian. This is also Jeffersonian and Hamiltonian democracy, as well as Federalist and anti-Federalist / Democratic Republicans. So we're going to start with big economy. We'll start with Hamilton. Hamilton is a Federalist. Big government. Control over every part of your lives. Lots of taxation. High tariffs. The creation of the National Bank. He believes that the economy is going to be centered in the North, where there's a lot of industry and power. And his big thing is business, business, business. Money, money, money. Also has the idea of big government. That's the Federalists. Jefferson, small government. State governments. Agrarian in particular. All the power of America is going to be in agriculture, not in factory work. Our wealth is from agriculture. We don't need to trade and be foreign policy with people because we have our own thing going on here in America. These are the anti-federalists, also known as the Democratic Republicans. You will see both of those terms on today's quiz. if you're in my class. But you need to know both of those. Okay? Last two things, foreign policy and foreign affairs. We're going to start with the specific one as the Citizen Genet affair. This is where basically France wants America to go into the Revolutionary War. Basically what happens with this Citizen Genet affair is that people begin to create bribes. Supposedly this guy got assassinated. That was an American diplomat. Basically what it does is it attempts to get America into the French Revolution. It partially works. Most of America wanted to. The government, though, ends up stepping in and says, no, we don't need to go over to France and things like that. We don't go, and that's why France hates us. It also begins the quasi-war as well as the XYZ affair. That's where we were receiving bribes to attempt to go into the French Revolution. Okay? In terms of other foreign policy, most of the ones that you're going to see, again, you may see those terms, Citizen Genet, XYZ, every couple of years. Biggest thing you need to know about foreign policy, Hamilton is going to support going into foreign affairs. He said most of this is capitalism, right? Going and doing things, but in particular, he's going to want to support Great Britain. The thing about the Citizen Genet affair and the French Revolution, though, is that is going to be supporting France. The Democratic Republicans supported France because they were more agricultural, they were more small town, and so the Democratic Republicans actually support the French Revolution, which is how they attempt to go. The Federalists stopped that. Another big thing that you need to know is George Washington said never get into foreign political affairs. Don't have alliances, don't go into wars, stay alone, and you'll be fine. Yeah, and we obviously followed exactly what George Washington said to do. I will tell you that last year some of the most missed question was on George Washington's farewell address. So make sure you study that. That's probably the most important end of 1700s politics is going to be George Washington. Does anybody have any questions before we leave?
Did we have a president throughout the Articles of Confederation? Like, was George Washington president and then the Articles of Confederation were created?
Well, technically we didn't have a president until after the war ends. The war is going to end in officially, I believe it was in 84, 85, something like that. I think the peace treaty is signed in 83, but we don't really have an active president until George Washington is going to be elected in 1788. So we pretty much just have this government trying to figure itself out for a couple years. The Articles of Confederation, though, were our government system from 1776 until 1787. And so it actually goes away right before George Washington comes. So technically we don't have it because the Articles said we couldn't have an executive. According to the Articles of Confederation, we couldn't have a president.
Okay.
Because we had no executive because who's going to pay him?
So we had a president after the Articles, or not after the Articles.
With the Constitution.
And the Constitution was created.
The Constitution designates that we can have a president and an executive power. The Articles said pretty much no federal government. You'll have hundreds of delegates, but that's part of the reason that the Articles failed is because you don't have somebody saying, okay, now let's actually figure this out together, because everyone's just going to argue with 250 people. You're not going to make any decisions, especially because according to the Articles, everyone had to vote yes. It's really hard to get 300 delegates to all agree on the same thing. Any more questions?
Just that one.
Just what?
Just one guy you mentioned.
Yeah. Okay, well, if you have any additional questions, you can chat with me. Lunch is almost over. Good luck. Be careful of robots.